Hey, Bio Peeps. Happy Friday, the 15th of May. And here, at this point, I believe we have 2 weeks left or 5 class periods. So, getting more and more excited for this home stretch, not to leave you guys, but just because it's been such a crazy end of the fourth quarter here. By this point, I have gotten a lot of emails about the genetics project and people sending them in and submitting them, and that's awesome. Apparently, Power School is struggles to load files that are too big, and so if your video file is too big, you can do one of two things. You can share the link in your drive and send it to me, or download it as an attachment and send it to me, but it might by default switch over to a drive file, and that's okay. And just email me it. You can also publish it to YouTube. I don't know if you guys have permission to publish videos to YouTube. That's what I usually do. Just it's easier for me to go back and find videos in future years. So that is the genetic disorder project. Once you finished it, you are like in the home stretch. Okay, we have two kind of assignments going on and then some reflective pieces, but it's downhill from here. Remember, podcasts are just narration, talking. There's usually no screen. There's a play button. It's basically, think of an audio book or listening to NPR or the news station and the radio. That's what a podcast is. You can do a screencast if you don't have if you don't do the podcast, do a screencast with your video and talk about it as you go through the slides, or talk about it as you go through the interactive poster you made, or the Powtoon, whatever works for you. Okay. But I do want that audio component in as either video, like a screencast video, or a podcast. Got it? So I'm kind of struggling here. This is one of my favorite units to teach, and we're cutting it down from 5-6 weeks to about 5 class periods, not even, to maybe more like 4 class periods. And so luckily we've talked a little bit about this unit before we get into it. So back when we talked about the African storyline, we talked about how different lions had certain advantages to them, and we looked at diets of different animals and how things were uniquely suited for the environment. And just recently, you've been looking at probability of traits being passed on from parents to offspring. And here's the deal. When a trait is good for the current environment that organism is in, that is called an adaptation. If that trait allows the parents or the organism to live long enough to reproduce and pass that trait on, okay, that is an adaptation. We say those animals or those organisms or those plants or bacteria are more fit. They have greater fitness. So maybe you remember when we talked about fitness is that ability to live long enough to reproduce, or the most successful in the environment to live and reproduce. So we're going to focus on this idea of genes. And so we know that all variations of a trait originally start as a mutation somewhere in the DNA. And then thanks to sexual reproduction and the shuffling and recombination from crossing over and from why am I having a mind fart? Random fertilization, independent assortment, okay, different processes through meiosis. There's lots of combinations of genes and traits that can be shuffled. And some organisms will have more favorable traits than others for an environment. And so Darwin, okay, back in the 1800s, he was a naturalist. He observed nature. He observed plant life and animals. And he found these observations that some were more successful than others. And he wondered why. And so he examined specimens, living, fossilized. He traveled around to look for patterns. And so he became sort of our father of what we call natural selection. Natural selection is just saying that organisms more suited for a environment that they live in will be more successful, pass on their genes, and that trait will become more common in a population. So the polar bear, for instance, okay, the white fur covering, which is actually more opaque-ish, it actually is better than, say, a brown bear when you're in the Arctic for hiding so you can pounce on prey, for retaining the radiation and reflecting it back. And so what happens is that coloring is more suited for that environment. And so that polar bear is naturally selected for that particular environment as compared to the brown bear. The brown bear, however, if you were to come down into like the United States, will be naturally selected for his traits with his fur coloring, and his fur thickness will be more common down here in the United States. And that's what natural selection is stating. It's just saying that the frequency of traits in a population may change depending on the fitness of the organism. Okay? So what you're going to do today is watch two puzzles. One is, what is evolution? Who was Charles Darwin? Let me see if I have that one up. Nope. Okay, and it looks like this. And this is sort of an introduction to the idea of evolution. We're going to talk about myths and misconceptions next week. Evolution is simply change over time. Natural selection is one way that organisms can change over time. And that's that whole survival of the fittest, the most fit trait becoming more popular, the frequency increasing in a population. So natural selection is one mechanism that can help things change over time, one mechanism of evolution, if that makes sense. And so we're going to watch this like little introduction here. And then on Monday, you're going to do a little simulation, and we're going to go on to evidence of evolution. What evidence do we have that organisms have changed over time? Okay? And we're going to watch a myths and misconceptions video. Now, the whole evolution unit, I know can be a little bit, some people may become a little uncomfortable with it. Feel free to share information with your parents. Talk to them about it. I'm coming from the science perspective right now and science-based evidence with presenting this to you. But I know some people have their faith-based ideas. And so you need to figure out what works for you on that one, okay? Okay, so really quickly here. What is evolution? Who is Charles Darwin? And rock pocket mouse. Oh, I was going to say the evolution unit lends itself really well to case studies, looking at different organisms and how their features have changed over a period of time. And so that's why we're going to be doing videos kind of to finish out the year. We do have one simulation next week, but this way you can actually see examples of natural selection occurring, of evolution occurring. Now, I say natural selection, there's also artificial selection when humans decide to breed certain animals, like dog breeds, for instance, artificial selection. Many of the foods we eat, artificial selection. They're artificially decided on, their traits are, for growers to maximize yields and profits and whatnot. Okay, so we're going to focus on natural selection. There's also an interesting case study that I usually show. It's on skin color and the environment, and it talks about how the idea of these different changes, the reason we have different skin colors, why certain skin colors are favored in certain environments. Actually, there's a scientific reason for it, and so it's going to talk about something called melanin, and it's going to give like the pros and cons, because while melanin can be good at protecting skin from an organism from skin cancer, it can also block out certain nutrients that we need. And so you can kind of see a human example here. This is not required. It's just if you want to watch it. I think this one's less than 5 minutes, but I'm not going to require this particular one. These two are the ones that I would like you to look at. Okay, so if you have any questions, email me. I have a vet appointment for my puppy tomorrow morning at 8:30. So I might not be back on the computer until about 10:30, 11 tomorrow. But I will be grading and checking emails regularly. So if you send me an email, I will get back to you at some point. Okay, have a good day, you guys.